The technologist in me feels like, yeah, we should just enable tech in everything and AI magically does these things. But I don't think it's practical. A lot of the transformation that we are going through for AI is actually not technology transformation. It is business transformation. You're talking about like a 73-year-old retired participant who wants access to their funds or wants to make a decision. It requires a different level of care, right? So I think the human advantage will have a more pronounced impact. Hi, this is Sastry Durvasula. I am the Chief Operating Information and Digital Officer at TIAA, and you're watching Macro Talk.
Sastry, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Hope. Thanks for having me here.
Your title, I just want to start there because it is so unusual, I think, for someone to have so much on his plate. From what I understand, you essentially have almost half of TIAA under your org, or did I misunderstand past podcasts when I was listening to research here for our show?
Workforce perspective, yes, Hope. And I know it's like a very unusual long title, and one of these days I'm going to try to trim it. I may use some AI recommendations for that, but essentially I have the four legs of the enterprise, global technology, global operations across our business lines, our global digital and client experience, and our shared services. So that's my remit. Yeah.
I wanted to start there because you have such a large mandate. So I want to know why it makes sense to have so many of these reporting lines coming into one person for the company, and how you actually manage your time day to day.
Yeah, so when we started the journey, it made sense, but it actually makes a lot more sense now, to be honest, because when we started the journey, our hypothesis was that all of the operations do need to get transformed with the power of technology. So that's why technology and operations were kind of brought together when I was hired into TIAA. And eventually we added digital and client experience because we can move forward without having delightful experiences, whether it's in our B2B setting or our B2C setting. But then now, with the advent of AI, we're going to have to rewire the whole company. So bringing in operations, shared services, technology, and putting the power of AI into all of that while you're enabling the enterprise, I think that really makes a lot of sense at this point. Obviously, it's a heavy mandate for any Fortune 100 company. And in a role like this, I have to be very judicious, on where I spend time. But undoubtedly, like every other operating officer out there, AI is front and center for everything we do. So it is a huge opportunity. But the way these Legos kind of came together, some by design and some almost accidentally before AI kind of came into this level of impact zone, it kind of came nicely together. Yeah.
Would you recommend other companies follow suit in consolidating these lines?
It depends, because, if you see like some of our other peer institutions, whether it's in the retirement sector or more broadly in the banking and financial services, you've got Chief AI Officer, for instance, that's being hired. In my case, AI head is in my leadership team. So could you make an enterprise-wide impact with a thinly defined role like a Chief AI Officer, like we had Chief Digital Officers? I used to be one, by the way, in my past careers. Could you really make the enterprise-wide impact when you don't have the operational responsibilities and you don't have the execution responsibilities on a day-to-day for these operations? It's possible in some companies. And I think, mostly in legacy companies like us, it's probably better to have an integrated team structure where you can instill the level of accountability and have leaders that are responsible for driving true enterprise-wide impact, not having to worry about, who's running the operations, who's running the execution, and who's running the strategy, for instance. Yeah.
In the conversations that I've had this year, so many businesses are struggling with the chain of command, especially when it comes to AI. By having this type of role, are you ultimately the person that has that veto power?
Yeah, accountability, right? Accountability is extremely critical when it comes to such a massive transformation. We're talking the level of transformation that we all went through with the advent of the internet. It's that level of massiveness. So if you have a single throat to hug from a decisioning rights and an accountability perspective, it makes a lot of sense, because if you want to really move fast, And if you have, like in our case, 3 businesses, right? So the 3 business CEOs, all of their operations and technology and client experience and shared services are managed by my teams. And a lot of the transformation hope that we are going through for AI is actually not technology transformation. It is business transformation. It's change management. It's people transformation. It's operational transformation and rewiring the company, through shared services and redesigning the shared services. So it's going to be very hard to treat this as something that is a tech-driven for tech or tech-driven for the enterprise. I think it has got to get into a level of zone with the business transformation and business operations. So that's why I feel like a role like this makes a lot of sense. And I actually think that there are other CEOs like me in these big companies that have similar remits. You may have a strategy person for AI that is kind of outside of the remit, but in my case, I just happen to be a practitioner leader, so it made sense for me to not only own the operations and rewiring and transformation and all that, but also own the strategy. But if, depending on the people you have and talent you have, different models could happen, right?
The discourse right now around AI, it can be very confusing for individual workers to navigate. How are you seeing your own workforce react, and how do you personally maybe assuage some of the concerns that some people might have around their own job security?
Yeah, I think there is a microscope view and there is a telescope view on this, right? So as a software engineer in rehab myself, it's quite exciting to have like an AI companion working with us to do the coding tasks. Or if I'm a marketing manager, a financial analyst, or a research analyst, or a legal analyst, makes a lot of sense. But then there is also a sense of anxiety. Okay, so if I'm training the AI to this level, what's my relevance in the future? So that is the microscopic concern. But, we've seen the previous waves, hope. So like 2007, when the smartphones with the advent of Steve Jobs flashing the iPhone came, what GDP was like 58.5 trillion back then. Now the GDP is like double that, right? If you look at the worldwide GDP, the population hasn't grown at that level. So we didn't think about Uber back then. We didn't think about Airbnb. We didn't think about TikTok when the smartphones came. And now you have like these massive companies that were made possible by the advent of smartphones, but far beyond what smartphone companies actually envisioned at that point. Now, a good friend of mine, Kelly Monahan, actually has written this book, and she always talks about this analogy, which actually has become my go-to analogy to describe AI's impact, which is the elevator. So if AI is the elevator, when the elevator first came, people were very excited that, oh, wow, I could go from my first floor to the 5th floor or 6th floor very easily because I could just get in this and I don't have to climb up and down the stairs. But what it really made possible was the skyscrapers, the fact that we have 100-story buildings. So I don't think we know, frankly, at this point, what that future will be. I think we have to think a lot beyond frontier models and software layers and agentic ecosystems and even transforming businesses that exist today. I think we have to see beyond that. So if you think about it from a worker point of view, we just don't know the future jobs. I think when the internet came, 1991, it was the world's GDP was a fifth of what we have today. It doubled since the advent of smartphones. So would it follow a similar curve? Yes. On the bull side, you could say the economy will continue to grow, job market will continue to raise, jobs will be rewired. But on the bear side, you could say, well, there's a lot of hope, but there's a lot of hype. We still have to see the ROI. I think near term, there will be some turbulence. There's no question as we kind of adjust ourselves to this new curve. But I would like to think that longer term, this would be the equivalent of the mobile phone or the internet.
I actually have had Kelly on the show, so it's funny that you mentioned her. Yeah. She's great.
I hope she used the elevator analogy in that podcast.
She didn't actually. But I'll email her and just let her know. I think one of the biggest challenges and what I try to do on this platform is, connect the two news feed or timelines, if you will, because if you're a business leader, you're naturally self-selecting as a optimist. And I think if you're somebody who doesn't have like the mandate that you have and other business leaders have, you are so worried, right, just about your day to day. It's hard to see the big picture. Have you found any ways that you've been able to maybe break through some of those conversations that you've had with people and make them sort of see the light, if you will?
Yeah, my general approach, and this is, I guess, me, coming from McKinsey talking a little bit because, I have a different lens on these things. And I do think that emphasizing both the microscope and telescope is extremely critical. So if I'm talking to a software engineer in my team, if you put the telescope out, you know what? You could be the best orchestrator of these agents. And you would bring in a level of business acumen that the agents don't have because we are a 100-plus-year-old company. You will bring in the human in the loop governance and trust. You will bring in the relationship skills, and you will actually enable a level of business transformation that you were not able to enable before because you were just busy coding Python, right? So that's the positive side if you think about it. So if you rewire your job, you could become a lot more empowering for your company, way beyond what a typical software engineer could have dreamed like 5 years ago, right? On the microscope side, your job is changing, my friend. Half of your coding tasks are going to be done by agents like they're being done today. So why don't we write what we do as a software engineer on a piece of paper and see what has to be automated with AI like today, right? And then what do you do with that time that comes back to you? It's kind of like if I'm the chef in the kitchen, before electricity, what was chef's job? And after electricity and all these appliances came, what did it become? So where did they invest the time? Did they come up with better recipes? Did they come up with like more experimentation on a global cuisine level? Did they scale their business? If they were a restaurant chef, that's the opportunity, right? So I think we're going to have to meet the people where they are in their respective jobs. My job is changing as well, right? Everybody's job, your job is changing. The way you would have done podcasts 3 years ago and the way you do it now is changing, right? So I feel like meeting them where they are, but almost putting the accountability where it belongs, which is every person that's working today is responsible. And I use this 80-20 you might have seen. 80% of the jobs will change at least 20%, and 20% of the jobs will change as much as 80%. That's my 80-20 rule. You could almost apply that to any tech transformation we had. So the best person that can assess whether you're on 80% or 20% or 30% or 70% is the person that's actually doing the job, right? So I think putting that microscope and telescope level development plan is so critical. And the human advantage is going to be so much more critical. That's the artisan skill. Agentic AI will never be able to bring that human advantage. So you're going to have to define what your atomic properties are. And as the industry now talks like soft skills are the new hard skills. I mean, this conversation cannot happen between two agentic AI, right? I mean, this has to be a human conversation. I have operations teams that actually call and talk to the customer. You're talking about like a 73-year-old retired participant who wants access to their funds or wants to make a decision. It requires a different level of care, right? So I think the human advantage will have a more pronounced impact.
It's funny when I speak to operators who are not pure AI companies or tech companies, I hear a lot of sort of human-led values and leadership principles and strategies. I was interviewing the CEO of Zoom and Glean at the Human X conference, so very heavy AI enterprise, B2B. And, Erica, the CEO of Zoom, he wants to have his digital twin talk to other digital twins that other CEOs have created for themselves. So I find that to be such an obvious contrast in like leadership styles and visions for the future. When you are looking at some of these headlines that other leaders are saying to the public, they're being very loud, like what goes through your mind? Because they dictate so much of what people perceive AI to be that I would imagine it makes your life more difficult day to day to try to kind of claw back the fear a little bit. So, if a Sam Altman or Dario Amodei is saying half of white collar workers are going to be like out of a job, right? That is the context under which you have to operate. And so I don't envy your position in having to make people feel differently when that's the narrative.
You have 2 points in that question, right? So let's talk about Eric's point of view. I mean, first of all, he's a great we are a big client, and he's been a great partner for us. If your end product is technology, what you're actually reaching out to your customers, whether it's B2B or B2C, is a technology product, then yes, the argument is different. But if your end product is this bottle, if your end product is a financial product, if your end product is selling plans, that's a very different product management in that sense, right? Like, the consumers are not looking for a technology in this sense, right? We deal with big higher ed companies and healthcare institutions. They're dealing with us because of our financial products that we're offering to their participants, right? So it's very different. The technologist in me feels like, yeah, we should just enable tech in everything and then put the tech inside and AI magically does these things. But how do you reach out to these consumers who are making financial decisions, basically putting their retirement savings with us and trusting us with technology and only technology? I don't think it's practical, right? So you're going to have the human values, human advantage, relationship skills, the emphasis on the human-to-human connection. Now, yes, it will dramatically change, and how the customers kind of consume the product will dramatically change. There's a massive wealth transfer that's happening between generations in front of our eyes. This is the largest wealth transfer that has ever happened in the history, right? So when that happens and the next generation kind of picks it up, and these are generations that were post-internet, the way they would consume the products will be different. But I think it's hard to say at this point that all the jobs will dramatically go away and human advantage could be augmented or replaced by AI. I do think that by function it will, and I always go back to my 80-20. So there will be impact in terms of jobs gone, but based on the industry and the product you're serving and the services you're providing and who your audience is.
So the other question of that, and this will be the last question on this, is around the operating environment of whether or not you think some of that narrative has made your life more difficult as a leader, because all this anxiety is not created necessarily from you, right? It's created from all the headlines that we generate and all the things that they say.
It definitely has made my job a lot more complex and a lot more interesting and a lot more challenging. But I've only worked for these 100-year-old firms my entire career, right? So, Amex, Marsh & McLennan and McKinsey, which is turning 100 this year. So when I was at McKinsey, COVID happened. So we had to put all the entire global business on Zoom, right? So that was a big challenge. Same thing with mobile and the internet. I think these challenges, frankly, are expected at this point. We are still in the early stages of the curve. It definitely makes it complex, but this is not the first rodeo for a lot of the leaders that are leading these, definitely not for me. So I feel like it's in a privileged spot to be at this level of leadership responsibility where you could take all the learnings. Not many learnings are directly applicable, but there is enough people side learnings, change management learnings, value creation learnings, economics that go with these big transformations that you could apply to the AI transformation. And AI is not a new topic. AI has been there for a long time. It's just that the level of availability of AI in the hands of our day-to-day lives and customers is dramatically different. But we have been dealing with AI ML for a long time, right?
I appreciate that you brought up your length of experience as a leader, as somebody who's worked through technology and advising companies on the other side. I have not heard that perspective yet in my conversations, but I do think that, with age comes a bit of like that wisdom where that things probably aren't as bad as you think it's going to be.
I got
sorry,
listen,
no. I am not like, I am not close to retirement age, but I'm also not like Gen Z age. So, the other reason I'm bringing it up is because I think this is also where the friction comes from, is that when you're trying to lead, especially younger people, and try to tell them like things are going to be okay, like they have no perspective of that because their entire life has been, right, COVID and inflation and now AI. So I'm just thinking through my own like reporting this year of why there's been so much friction in the narrative. And so I'm just you're unfortunately on the other end of my thinking out loud at this point. But I do think, like, executives that I've talked to, when I ask them, like, what is the number one skill that someone should have, something that I have not heard is, like, if you're able to roll with the punches and deal with change, I think you're going to be in a better position. I think some people call it, like, being agile, but I'm curious how you would answer that question.
I mean, from my perspective, I think the number one skill is almost like a human plus AI, and some call it the fusion skill set. I think at this point, everybody has to have that skill set, right? So I may be the best leader who has mastered the art of leading through transformations, mobilizing teams, inspiring them, having them to embrace the change, etc. But if I don't know anything about AI and how to actually employ AI agents in my day-to-day workflow, and I haven't actually firsthand experienced it, and I cannot orchestrate in my own head how humans and AI would come together for things that we do, it's impossible for me to lead through this change, right? On the other hand, I am the best AI agentic orchestrator. I'm a native AI person. I love going into Cursor and doing this and blah, blah, blah. But I can visualize the human aspect or the change management aspect to your earlier comments. And then the second piece is really like, be transparent and clear about your workload, right? I mean, just own it and make sure that you are able to rewire it. Because if you don't, somebody else will. Own the craft, but be open to outsourcing the workflow if you need to the machine, and be better at the craft in the process, like taking the time back and then using that for, advancing your own craft.
Yeah, it's interesting. The workflow, I've not heard that. You, I think, in past conversations have talked a little bit about the idea of token maxing. Did you call token maxing stupid, or was that another CEO that I was listening to, another executive?
I mean, I have my own point of view on token maxing. I don't know if I called it stupid.
What do you think of token maxing?
Well, I mean, listen, this is all like in-transit issues, right? To me, we've all read the Uber news. They burned the entire token, budget in the first quarter itself. But if we were to project it out a little bit, like 5 years from now, these frontier models that we have, yes, they will be there, they will be relevant, but there will be a level of orchestration on top of these models, right? Like, we're not going to use a highly costly model for every low value task. So there will have to be some normalization of the economics of this, right? I mean, I'm not even questioning, like, what's the cost of reference in the future? Will it dramatically come down compared to what it is today? Blah, 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 blah. Let's assume that the cost of reference doesn't change, right? There will be cheaper options for low value tasks. We're not going to go burn these tokens on these, big expensive LLMs for every task. So there will be a level of agentic orchestration layer that comes in. Maybe that is where the future of software as a service industry will go. Of course, there are predictions like, well, SaaS companies will die. Well, SaaS companies do understand the enterprise better than the frontier model companies. They're still fighting it out, like who's more consumer focused, who's enterprise focused. Now everybody's enterprise focused, right? I guess my hypothesis is there is that layer above the LLMs. So if you put like data center, power, infra, chips, all that stuff, then you put the frontier models, and then there is like an agentic orchestration layer that can be filled with these enterprise grade software companies that can reinvent themselves. Then they could actually normalize this whole curve. Like, when do you use a frontier model? When do you use a low cost model? When do you just use your own open source model that you've implemented if the lag is only 6 months? And how do you orchestrate all of that? That's the whole hypothesis we had from day one, that there will be a BlackBerry in the making. There will be an AOL in the making. There will be a Netscape in the making here. These were original disruptors, right? So there will be companies that will prevail, like the Googles of the world from those days, and there will be companies that may not prevail. That's why we have LLM agnostic. We have tech agnostic, LLM agnostic. So yeah, if a model is more expensive, I'm not going to burn those tokens. I might burn tokens on some other model that is less expensive for these specific tasks. I may still go to the more expensive model for premium tasks. So if you're doing cancer research, yes, sure. But if you're doing general patient billing, do you need to do the same level of LLM capabilities? Maybe not. Well, then you're going to have to follow the curve, right?
But are you concerned about the concentration of power that these frontier labs hold at the moment? I mean, I asked
I'm
this
not.
question. You're not. I mean,
I'm not.
they
I'm
hold the
not.
keys. No, I mean, you're building on top of these models. They can decide to sunset Fable one day. If you're building on top of that, like it seems like a pretty risky proposition for so many companies, enterprises now to pour into this one, technology, putting their chips on it, and then they decide that they're going to stop subsidizing all of the costs. I mean, that's a big concern too, is that right now these costs are what they are because it is VC money, right? At some point, like when they go to public markets, there's going to be more pressure for them to grow. They're going to raise your costs. They're going to, I don't know. I mean, to me, it seems like it could be a risky, again, proposition for so many businesses now to be reliant on all of the models.
Well, I mean, that's what we thought about hyperscalers, right? When we were all moving into cloud, not too long ago, we were on data centers as a world, and we had AWS and then GCP, Azure, Oracle, and other clouds. Yes, so they have the holding power in that sense. Like if all the cloud providers are gonna like increase the cost, then all the companies that are using half of my workload is on the cloud at least, right? Just like the mainframe has always been with the IBM, desktop is either with Apple or with Google or with Microsoft. There will always be competition, but I don't think they'll have the full power. I think it's just one stack. It's like the same argument could be made on NVIDIA today, right? I mean, you could make the argument on power infrastructure. Like one, 5 gigawatt data center consumes as much power as the entirety of New York City, right, in 1 year. So, well, do the power companies hold the power? I mean, they hold the power, but not like the controlling power. So I think at every layer, I believe there will be different dynamics playing out. And I do think that at some point it will shift into these orchestration layers more and more because they own the enterprise relationships a lot more. And that's where the friction points will actually come, to be honest. Like, why did SpaceX, announce the acquisition of Cursor, for instance, right? Because it is an orchestration layer at the end of the day, right? So I think we will have enough friction between the frontier model companies, but more importantly, between them and the orchestration layers, because they will be like forcing the cost in a way. There will be wholesalers, there will be retailers, like it's like the Costco model in that sense. There will be a pressure point. So yes, we as businesses are directly consuming these LLMs, and we have great partnerships with all these LLM frontier model companies, and we will continue to advance these partnerships. But there will be enough players in the ecosystem. Hope that that ecosystem will play itself.
When you say that it's very similar to the growth of the hyperscaler model and the dependencies, I get that point. I think for me, I guess we're just witnessing it at such a extreme pace, number one, and the way that products are being built now are so different and so intertwined. And I get that you still needed the hyperscalers to go through the growth periods that you have as well. I think it just, to me, feels a little precarious that so many eggs are being put into this one basket when, you mentioned a lot of things like resources and all these things are still open questions. I see so much of these data center projects being stalled now because of pushback in the public. And so one of my worries is if there isn't enough capacity, does everybody get what they were promised essentially? And then ultimately, like, what is like the Honda Accord like model that everyone can just ride for decades and be totally fine and efficient?
No, it's a great analogy, right? That's why I say, what's the cost of inference at this point, right? So I do think that training these models and keeping up with these model evolutions is an expensive task, but there will be pressure on the compute side. There will be pressure on coming up with this same level of impact with a lower cost compute environment. But that's on one side. But there is the open source. There is the small language models that are more custom built for a specific. Like if you're doing cancer research, why do you need this whole world model? Why can't you just use cancer research or healthcare model? Why do you need a model that's trained on like consumer behavior on electronics. I mean, it's like, because we're dealing with a world model here, right? So I do think that there will be that ecosystem play. And then I also believe that the end consumer will play a significant role. The consumer mindset is going to change dramatically, right? So like we've seen with the internet and with the mobile phone. So what's the go-to device in your life where you would consume? I mean, right now it's the cell phone, right? So, okay, so how do you consume this model on your cell phone? Maybe you're using their respective apps, but is that going to be the future? Or will you have like one interface? I mean, obviously we've seen the Gemini Apple News, right? I think there will be ecosystem plays, not just the enterprise agentic layer, but even on the consumer layer. Like, who owns the consumer mindshare, and how do you consume it today, and how do you consume it 5 years from now? So if the consumer behavior is changing 5 years from now, they're going to expect the same level of behavioral responsiveness from the enterprises. So the way they consume financial products today is going to be different from, the way we'll consume in 5 years, right? So I think we're going to have to, I always keep the extremes in mind, right? So the consumer behavior will be very different. Like we've seen it, right? Like, okay, credit card. Yes, people still pull the credit card, but how often are they just tapping? Or how often are they using their cell phone? How often are they just embedding the credit card behind everything, right? So if you were to look at the credit card as the LLM in this case and say, okay, payments are happening with those, but there's a big ecosystem above it, right? If you're shopping on Amazon and you plugged in that credit card in the Amazon shopping your profile, do you think about the credit card that you're using every time, or do you just go and shop on Amazon, right? So then Amazon owns your mind share. So what is that consumer behavior driving layer? What is the enterprise driving layer that's going to really dictate which LLM gets used and how it gets used? I think there's a lot of things that we still have to wait and see how this will evolve.
Yeah, and I ultimately think that one of the biggest mistakes that some of these frontier labs made is try to make it a consumer story first, when really the power of AI, as we all have seen, is in the enterprise, and that consumers
that's the difference, right? You've seen it, OpenAI versus Anthropic. I mean, obviously we follow the whole debate in all these forums. Anthropic would say that they have taken an enterprise first mindset. OpenAI obviously more or less has been the default consumer first mindset, but they had a lot of different horses in the race, and now they've like adjusted it back, and I think they're pivoting back more to be enterprise focused. I mean, there is no right or wrong answer in this, right? At the end of the day, you're going to have to do both if you're an LLM company, but you almost have to visualize that 5 years from now, people may not directly consume you. People may consume you through others. And who are those others that you want to be relevant in? Like if I'm going to Amazon shopping and I want to buy something for a 3-year-old, am I going to Rufus on Amazon and ask it, hey, what's the most trending 3-year-old boy toy right now that I should be buying for a birthday? Or am I going to go to ChatGPT or Claude at this point, or Gemini? What's more convenient for me? I'm already in Amazon. Why would I go somewhere else unless I don't trust Rufus, right?
No, I don't disagree with you. You made the point that it has to be both consumer and enterprise. I want to just go back to you on that point, because consumers are strapped for time. They're not the most tech savvy on a day-to-day basis. So what does that look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, right? I don't have a crystal ball answer, but having seen the other technology revolutions, right? The embracing of the smartphone in personal lives was much faster compared to their business lives, right? A lot of us were still holding on to the BlackBerry for a long time on the business side, and I was like, I'm not giving my keyboard away. And then and I was running technology, for God's sake. So I'm like, okay, finally I give it up, and then I switched to the smartphone. But I think the enterprise shift will go slow because of just the very nature of these things. But today, where do we do banking? On the cell phone. Where do we do retail? On the cell phone. Where do we do communications? On the cell phone. Where do we do anything? So if these banks if these healthcare providers, if these retailers didn't advance their ecosystems to be relevant in this space, maybe those companies don't exist today. So there's going to be a little bit of an advantage of a lull in that sense, that if you don't move fast, you're going to lose this. You're going to lose this out completely. I mean, that's kind of like, it's easier to do like an Uber shift for a consumer who's already familiar with hailing for a taxi than visualizing that same consumer not walking into a bank and doing a wire transfer on a phone, right? I mean, it's hard transition, but we've done it successfully as humanity. So I think that's why I feel like these frontier companies or layers above them have to do both, because if they don't help the enterprises to be better, to be relevant in this AI era for the changing consumer who has already changed, it's going to be very hard. But I think we're beyond the pilots at this point, Hope. I feel like we are in the main zone now. So we're going to have to think the whole thing, the whole stack, right? The whole stack of impact.
And just lastly on this stack, as you mentioned it, in the past 2 years, how have you seen your own products evolve as these models have evolved, especially with Gate, for example?
Yeah, I mean, Gate is our generative and agentic intelligence technology. So first things we've done is we got to put this thing in the hands of our employees first, right? Because, we're still a very human-oriented industry. So when a participant calls, I want to make sure that the person that's talking to the participant, be it an advisor or an operator, has all the information and the power of AI. So that's been our biggest focus. So we've rolled it out to all the colleagues now. So 85% adoption on a daily basis. So that's one big thing. Then we roll it out to client-facing products, for instance, in fraud prevention, because we deal with a lot of older adult participants that are highly vulnerable to cyber scams and financial fraud. We deployed AI to be like the companion in that sense to the fraud prevention unit. We've deployed AI in some participant-facing aspects, but we still have a human in the loop, and we will continue to advance it. And then, of course, the shared services of the company, obviously there's a lot of opportunity to drive a level of rewiring in the firm. So that's where we are employing AI. But we're slowly making headways into like putting AI in the hands of our end customer, like a participant, but definitely more focused on the institutional aspect like B2B, and definitely a lot more focus on our colleagues who work with these participants.
And how have you found the experience to try to build in an environment where you are very, very regulated?
I mean, that's the fun part, right? That's why we have also created this Gate layer, to be honest, because listen, I mean, as a CIO, I could have said, well, okay, we'll take the leading frontier model and take the enterprise version and give it to all the colleagues, and people would have been supremely happy and it would have been secure. But then I'm putting all the eggs in the same basket, right? So we've taken the harder path of creating a layer above all these things and putting the security layer and proof of lineage, because we are a highly regulated industry. We do have a ventures arm where we're actually investing in reg tech that's focused on AI, and we're trying to integrate them into our ecosystem as well. Work closely, obviously, with the regulators, on a regular basis. The regulations will also be lagging, obviously at this point, with the pace of innovation that's happening in this space. So they're also trying to catch up. We are strengthening our first line, second line, third line of, defenses in the company. We're adding obviously a lot more cybersecurity focused talent. We're making the pivot in that sense because of Mythos, Fable, everything. We are a global company on the asset management side with Nuveen. We have a massive acquisition in front of us. So we are also focused on the globalness and the regulatory landscape that's coming on that front as well. But needless to say, tech will always be first. Business transformation will be next. Regulations will be third, in that order, at least today. And I hope that regulations will catch up to this at some point.
You just mean in terms of development, like how
yes.
each
The
layer.
speed of evolution, yeah.
Yeah. And just lastly, with some of the big IPOs that are that we're expecting with Anthropic and with OpenAI, how do you think that will change how you run your business, think about strategy, just early expectations on how the world will change as a result of these massive IPOs?
Yeah, I think, the optimist in me feels that that's very similar to what we've seen in the past, right? Like, when Google came out first, I do think that having a level of publicly held company set of responsibilities on these firms is actually a good thing, because they'll scale better, no question about it. But it also comes with a level of scrutiny and governance and industry expectations, etc. So you could demystify some of the hope and hype that's out there through that. So I think it's a good thing on one side. Yes, we'll go through this big curve of like bulls versus bears, and are we in a bubble? What's going to happen? Is this the replica of .com, all that stuff? But it'll normalize, right? Eventually, we overestimate what's going to happen in the next 2 years and underestimate what's going to happen in the next 10. So eventually, I think, whoever prevails in this new economy, if they're able to drive the value of the economics to their own ecosystems, because I'm still a skeptic on who's going to ultimately get the economics of the value chain. Will it all be centralized, to your original question on who's holding the power with the LLM frontier model companies? I highly doubt it, right? I mean, because it's a bigger ecosystem. So you're going to have to visualize this stack of things. And so the IPOs are exciting to be really mainstream on this topic at this point. And it also is good because there will be more scrutiny on some of this. There will be better scale. They'll have more capital to drive with. But it also is the beginning of the next beginnings. Like, to go back to my Kelly elevator analogy, we haven't seen the skyscrapers yet. We're only focused on the Otis elevator right now, which is the LLM companies. Yeah.
Is there anything that we haven't talked about today with respect to anything that you're building, you're working on, that you've been thinking about? Everything's on the table, as has been clear in the last in this last hour that we've been chatting.
We talked a little bit about cyber, but no question it should be on top of mind for every leader, every CEO, every COO, every CIO, obviously, because the speed with which the attack vector is changing, the level of impact a bad actor could have has gone 10x, literally in the last 1 year. So I think if there is one thing, and third parties, every firm uses a lot of third parties. We've seen obviously the impact of some of these third parties that got breached in the last 3 years. Imagine that's happening at scale on a quarterly basis. That's our biggest focus right now at TIAA. Like, how do we make sure that the financial security that we promise to our participants comes with security built in? It's something that you really have to verticalize for your industry and for your own customers, and make sure that that is served in a way that it is relevant for them. So to me, that's the biggest focus area beyond the promise and the economics of AI. The misused AI's evil side has to be better understood, I think, by every leader at this point. Yeah.
That's great. Well, we'll leave it at that for today. I'll have a lot of food for thought for my next guests on this topic. I think I haven't focused on it enough myself. So thank you for that idea. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope that we can continue this conversation in the future.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. Cheers.